Good evening, everybody. I don't know how many people are on because we're using this program called ManyCam to project this so I can use the PowerPoint slides efficiently. I can't unfortunately see who's on or questions, but if you do have questions as we're going along, please put them in the comment line, and Ann is watching on Facebook and is going to feed those back to me. And I'd really like to go through those towards the end so we can all go through those because I got quite a bit of material to cover in what is one of my favorite topics, and actually one of the most important ones I think that we deal with. I know a lot of people always wonder why we're so interested in their gut health. And if you think about it, that's literally where everything in your body begins. So it runs by the food that you put in. And like the computer guys say, junk in, junk out. And so if you don't feed the program or the computer well, the body is not going to run very well. And so I want to go through all those things, try and explain those and the importance of how to improve your health and your longevity, because literally this gut that we have is 70 to 80% of our immune system, and that is what keeps us healthy for the long run. So I'm going to jump in with the PowerPoint presentation so we can go through that. Like I said, I have a lot of information to cover, and then if we have questions at the end, we'll kind of go through those one by one. So hope you enjoy this and hope it's educational for you. I know some patients that I've seen, we've covered a lot of this, but I hope it's educational for people that have not learned anything about their gut. And I would encourage everyone to share this with family and friends, because a lot of people have gut issues and they don't even think they do, because it's normal to feel bad or to have gas or bloating or loose stools after you eat. And those are really not normal things, or shouldn't be normal things. And so if you have friends or family that have issues that they're wondering about, or their body is inflamed. I saw a person today that had a gluten allergy, and they didn't know the aches and pains they had could be driven just by the inflammation in the gut from their gluten allergy. And so lots to learn. So let's go with that, and then we'll get back together visually towards the end. So here we go. So gut health equals immune health. And Hippocrates said a long time ago that all disease begins in the gut, and that's absolutely true. And if you keep your gut healthy, it really helps prevent disease in the long run, which is really the goal for all of us. I jokingly tell my patients I want to drop dead healthy at 100, and that really is the goal for you as well, to live the best life you can. And that's always been my slogan for us to help you live your best life. So if we go on with the slides, we'll jump in here. And so at the present time, what's in your gut? We happen to be the most overfed yet undernourished nation in the world. And what do I mean by that? Food is available 24/7, even though you may have noticed some issues with that in supermarkets recently. But overweight is a big problem, and that's a body mass index between 25 and 29. So that's 30% of our current population. Obesity is a body mass index greater than 30, and that's 40% of our population. The standard American diet, or the SAD diet as I call it, is mostly highly processed foods with loads of chemicals. And all you have to do the next time you go to the supermarket is pay attention to what people have loaded into their carts, and you start to understand why some people look the way they do, and why some people have trouble navigating the grocery store and they have to hold on to the cart because they're inflamed and hurting. So what's a highly processed diet? Sugar, simple carbohydrates like bread, pasta, and potatoes. And I'm not saying you shouldn't ever eat those. I'm saying we need to limit those quantities. And then inflammatory fats, and all of those foods lead directly to inflammation on the body. So then if you have inflammation, what does that cause? Fatigue. What's one of the biggest things I see in the office? People come in and say, I'm tired. I'd love to have more energy. Joint and muscle aches, poor sleep, brain fog. You can't remember stuff. And people come in worried that they've got the beginnings of Alzheimer's, when really it's just poor nutrition and an unhealthy gut. Diabetes ultimately stems from inflammation, and then the heart disease that follows with that or separately. And ultimately, inflammation leads to cancer. And I can't think of a better reason to change your diet than to avoid developing cancer at some point in your life. One of the biggest things with gut health is poor bacterial diversity. We have loads of bacteria and they need to be diverse. It's just like the United States. It should be a melting pot of bacteria and represented by many different types for our gut to be healthy. So we have issues with an unhealthy microbiome, as this bacterial world is called, and we have issues like Sibo, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, where the bacteria migrate into the wrong place. Skin health is an issue. Anybody that has acne tells me your gut's unhealthy. Those bacteria from the gut also populate our skin, and if your gut's unhealthy, your skin will be also. Eczema. How many people have eczema and they slap steroids on it to settle it down, but they don't fix the problem? Your skin is your largest organ of detoxification, and if you put toxins in all the time that drive inflammation, you end up with eczema as the body tries to get rid of those toxins. Hair loss, another issue. Psoriasis, also gut health, and ultimately an autoimmune disease issue like Hashimoto's, rheumatoid, type 1 diabetes, lupus, and others. And those are all things you don't want to get. So, an overview, like Hippocrates said, all disease begins in the gut. So, first question, what is your gut? Well, your gut is where everything that works in the body begins. So the food you put in ultimately makes it run. Your gut is a finely tuned mechanism. That's just how God designed it. It's very orderly, and lots of things can throw that out of balance. The stomach is partly acidic, and then as the food progresses from the stomach into the small intestine, it becomes more alkaline. Now, your gut has a surface area the size of a tennis court or a football field, which is a large area, but that's to absorb all the nutrients from the foods that you put in. Your large intestine then changes the alkaline or acidic nature to a neutral nature and draws fluid out to give you then your formed bowel movement. So gut bacteria is vital for our health, and some people feel that our health is really driven by our gut bacteria, and that microbiome is actually more important to our overall health than our own DNA is. So promoting your healthy gut helps keep your immune system healthy, which in my mind is kind of the key for things. So what's your good gut good for? Well, lots of things. Digestion. You have to be able to digest the foods that you eat. You have to absorb nutrients. Your immune system response is important for that. Hormone regulation, vitamin production, detoxification. The toxins that we get in the air, the food, and the water, we need to get out of the body, and the gut bacteria are vitally important for that. Mood management. A lot of people come in and they're depressed or anxious, or they have ADD. And in my world, those are brain chemical abnormalities or imbalances. But did you know that 70 to 80% of those brain chemicals or neurotransmitters are actually made in your gut? And if your gut's unhealthy and you're stressed because of work issues or home issues, you will then have depression or anxiety, and your body can't keep up with the production of neurotransmitters you need to keep things balanced and keep you functional. Weight management. This is an important thing we're going to talk about because many of us are struggling with our weight. Well, our gut bacteria play an important role in that also. So we did some individual videos on the gut health pillars, and really building a solid foundation for your best health is what this should be all about. So at the bottom layer, the genetics, diet, and lifestyle, I want to go through those. And so genetics, how important are those? Well, it's what you're born with, what I call our blessings. My parents blessed me with a gluten allergy. They also blessed me with a chromosomal abnormality where I don't activate folate normally, called an MTHFR defect. And that affects how I make neurotransmitters, how I detoxify, how I manage my cholesterol. And that's part of the reason why my mom developed Alzheimer's, and so why I'm working hard to prevent myself going down that pathway. And we can do that by really keeping our gut as healthy as possible. What about autoimmune disease? If there's autoimmune disease in the family and you have that gene, just because you have a gene does not mean you have to express it. And so I tell people, just because there's autoimmune disease in the family doesn't mean that you have to have autoimmune disease. There is a switch for that autoimmune gene, and it's turned on and off by foods and lifestyle, and these are what we call epigenetic factors that affect that switch. Same thing with cancer. One of my pet peeves is the BRCA gene or BRCA gene that is tested when women develop breast cancer. And the problem with that is uh, now I have had young daughters of patients that were diagnosed with breast cancer that have decided to have a mastectomy done because they have the BRCA gene. Just because they have that does not mean they have to develop breast cancer if they change their diet and their lifestyle. So prevention always trumps something mutilating like taking off the breasts. The problem with that is then we put implants in, and there's plenty of support in the non-medical literature, let's call it that, that supports breast cancer or that supports autoimmune disease being driven by breast implants. And so not only did you not have an issue with breast cancer, now you put a foreign object in your body that can increase your risk for autoimmune disease. Not a good plan. And so really prevention and getting your gut healthy is far wiser in my opinion. Diet. Okay, it's fuel. How you function, what you put in makes it run. My favorite analogy for this is, say you are driving your spouse's pickup truck that happens to run on diesel, and you pull up to the gas station and you're distracted because you're texting your friend, and you stick the unleaded nozzle in the tank and start filling it up, and then you go, oh wow, I really made a mistake here. How's the truck going to run when you start it up with unleaded in a diesel truck? Same thing with foods that you put into your body. If you don't put good stuff in, it's not going to run optimally. And so that's important. And so the fuel, we need to know about what are you buying, what are you growing, and what are you putting into your gut. And so really paying attention to putting high quality food in is going to be really important. Um, this is an example. I don't know how easy this is to read, but processed foods. Okay, and if you look at the top, you got a donut, a soda, a hamburger, a pizza, a cereal, and salt. And you can look through the chain of these as you move down the different flow charts. On the left hand side of the screen, these foods are dense with calories, but they are acellular and they are low in nutrients. And so you increase absorption from toxins from the gut, and you have less available food to feed the gut microbiome in your large intestine, which leads to unfavorable gut microbiome. And then those bacteria sometimes start to migrate into the small intestine, which leads to gas and bloating and other issues under that name of Sibo we mentioned initially. And that microbial dysregulation leads to immune and endocrine dysfunction. And the end result of putting in the bad foods is increased hunger, increased energy intake, insulin resistance, which is a step before diabetes, and hyperglycemia or elevated blood sugar. And that ultimately leads to inflammation. And then if you look at the bottom, increased chronic disease risk. And, off to the right side of that, increased carcinogenic potential. So you start to see that those processed foods we're eating are literally damaging our health. And so I jokingly tell people fast food is something you drive past, not through, um, except in rare circumstances. And most restaurants have better choices that you can eat as well. So now, in the opposite realm, whole plant foods. So eating fruits, vegetables that are hopefully as much organic as you can afford. You start to look at the phytochemicals, the nutrients that feed and fuel our body. It increases bioavailability for bacterial transformation. You decrease oxygen diffusion into the intestinal lumen, thereby decreasing pathogenic or abnormal bacteria, decreasing the inflammatory response, decreasing carcinogenic potential, and decreasing chronic disease. And on the right-hand side, that would help you decrease hunger, energy intake, decreases insulin resistance, blood sugar issues, and inflammation. So all of those things are really important. And if we go to the top in the middle where it says dietary fibers, those are digested in our gut, and they produce small chain fatty acids that really improve our barrier function in the gut. So that's where we talk about leaky gut or intestinal permeability that allows toxins from abnormal bacteria to be introduced to our immune system, which can be one of those things that turns on the autoimmune disease cascade. And we want to keep that trigger or switch turned off. Digestion. You need to be able to digest the food that you're putting in. So I'm sure everybody has heard your mother at some point say, chew your food better, you need to chew it 20 times. That's absolutely true. The saliva contains a hormone called amylase, which starts to break down the sugars and starches in your mouth already. And so the process really begins with chewing your food. The stomach's job is to churn the food, to mix it together, produces some acid and proteases. And then the gallbladder, and the next step as you move down the chain, is producing or storing bile, more correctly said. And that's introduced into the gut, which helps break down fats. And then as the food moves into the small intestine, our pancreas produces digestive juices, which help us break down fats and proteins. And again, we need to digest those foods to be able to improve or absorb those nutrients, because if we don't, we just end up with expensive poop, even though you're putting in the best quality food and ingredients. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth becomes a problem if we're not digesting appropriately, and the bacteria start to modify. Elimination, as my 2-year-old grandson would say, is merely pooping. You got to be able to get it out of your body. And Wesley knows that's important at the age of 2. And you wouldn't be amazed by the number of people that come in that feel it's normal to move your bowels once or twice a week. Ideally, your bowels should move twice a day. Once a day is acceptable. And that is so important to get those toxins out of the body, because otherwise you start to recycle those toxins. They're reabsorbed in the gut through what we call enterohepatic recirculation. And so the toxins your body's trying to get rid of is pulled back into your body, and it recreates the whole process of inflammation all over again. So your gut should literally almost be invisible to you. It should be what we refer to as happy. You should have a bowel movement once or twice a day, as we mentioned. It should be a formed log. There should be minimal odor, minimal wiping, and absence of abnormal symptoms, which would be gas, bloating, heartburn, constipation, and or diarrhea. So when you look on the internet, here's what we look at, the Bristol stool chart, and you look 1 through 7 types. Really where you want to be is type 4 in the middle. It's a nice sausage or smooth and soft bowel movement. The top of the chart, if your bowel movements look like deer or rabbit pellets, you got problems. And so as you move down to the other end of the spectrum, if it's watery and there are no solid pieces, entirely liquid, you also have a lot of problems. So in between, there are variations, but they all tell us the gut's unhealthy and your gut is not able to do what it needs to do. And we need to figure out what that is to help you improve your health. So elimination is also not just pooping, but also liver drainage and kidney drainage. We also remove toxins through drainage mechanisms, and those are important. And we usually try to approach those with homeopathic remedies to improve removal of toxins through the liver, and that helps us avoid some of the enterohepatic circulation. And we need to also remove toxins through the kidneys, and so we've got supplements that can help with drainage, but so can eating lots of fruits and vegetables for those natural phytochemicals that do the same thing. So again, your diet affects so many aspects of healthy gut function. Here's a picture of detoxification through the liver. This is actually from our Detox with the Doc program. And you look at the toxins that are in there. Look at the list. Microorganisms, so those are bacteria, contaminants, pollutants, insecticides, pesticides. Think of where we live in the middle of cornfields, and all the products that are sprayed on the crops when they're planting, when they're then processed, food additives, so flavor enhancers, things like that, medications or drugs that we take, and alcohol. I had somebody today that brought that up. It's not uncommon for them to drink somewhere between 12 and 24 beers on a weekend. Not only is that ungodly expensive, but alcohol is a toxin and you're literally pickling your brain, which is not unhealthy, or not healthy. Sorry. So phase one detoxification, you need all of these nutrients. So B vitamins, folate, fat-soluble vitamins like A and D, antioxidants, C, E, milk thistle helps that detoxification, calcium as well, and glutathione. We've all heard a lot about glutathione. It's important for your immune system function, but it's also your liver's primary detoxifier. And if you're low on that, you're going to have a tough time getting those toxins moved through the body and out. Phase one then changes into phase two, and you need different nutrients for that to function well. Amino acids like glycine, taurine, glutamine, and cysteine, and sulfur-based products. Where do we get the majority of our sulfur-based products? From healthy vegetables like what I call the um, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. Those are the cruciferous vegetables. And if you eat one of those every day, people that do have a much lower incidence of all types of cancers, but they also help with toxin elimination and hormone metabolism. So waste products can be eliminated from the gallbladder through the bile and into the bowels. And so we need to capture those things in the bowels and move it on out. Otherwise, we start to reabsorb those things, and then the kidneys dump that into the urine as well. So multiple different ways of detoxification. So what are some unhealthy gut symptoms? Some of these are notable, and some of them can actually be disabling. How many people have been told they have irritable bowel, which is alternating constipation, diarrhea, or mostly diarrhea? Irritable bowel in my world is literally a label when nobody knows what's going on. Um, and so really you need to find out, why is your bowel irritable? So that should be your first question. Somebody tells you have irritable bowel, your question should be, well, why? How about heartburn, reflux, or gastroesophageal reflux disease? How many people are taking a proton pump inhibitor or a PPI like the purple pill that gets advertised on TV all the time? And those medications block your acid production. A lot of times I see people with heartburn or reflux that have too little acid in their stomach or not enough pancreatic enzymes to digest their foods appropriately, and that leads to the heartburn. Let me explain the mechanism to you. There's a valve that closes your food tube from the stomach, and the trigger to close or tighten that valve is literally acid. And so if that valve doesn't close all the way because you don't have enough acid in your stomach and it remains partially open, all those other proteases and enzymes in your stomach can leak upwards into the esophagus. That's not built to handle that sort of digestive enzyme or acidic environment, and cause that burning sensation. So a lot of times the simple fix is to use a little apple cider vinegar and water and sip that, tightens up the valve, and the heartburn goes away. And a simple way to think about this is, if you're 50 and your doctor tells you you have too much acid, okay, if you're really stressed out for some major reason, then you might be producing some acid. But I would tell you that at the age of 50, most people will answer that their body doesn't work as well at 50 as it did as 20. And so why would you produce more acid at the age of 50 than you did at age 20? It doesn't make sense. And so oftentimes we need to look for the real root cause of that rather than taking the purple pill, because we need that acid to absorb calcium and magnesium and iron. And I see so many people that come in with those deficiencies, and all of those are important not only for energy, but also heart function. And how many people do we have with heart disease problems? And frequently that's just from taking the medications that are given to people because they're well-intentioned. Gas and bloating is an irritable bowel symptom, and is, an unhealthy sign. Flatulence or farting around the house, mucus production when you move your bowels. It's inflamed if you're producing extra mucus and the body's trying to heal it. Constipation or diarrhea, neither one of those are normal. And definitely if you have blood or black tarry stools, you got a problem and you got to get that figured out because that's definitely a sign of worse things to come. Microbiome, so your gut bacteria, that is 80% of our immune system. Like I said, many people feel that that is more important for our health and function than our own DNA. So balance, like everything else in the body, we need to have a balance between the good and the dysbiotic bacteria. We don't want to have candida, which is a yeast, and we definitely don't want to have parasites. And you'd be surprised how many people I find that have parasites. And yes, in this ultra clean United States, we do have parasites because we import foods from other countries where they may be fertilized with cow manure or even human poop. And then, if you think about this, how many of us have pets that live with us? You have your favorite dog. When he's happy to see you and you bend over to pet him, sometimes they lick you in the face. So guess what else they lick? And that's an easy way to transmit parasites from their mouth to your mouth. And so if you worm your dog, you ought to think about worming yourself, because that's a common thing that I see with gut health issues. And if you travel, either because you're doing mission work or for business, and you eat in foreign countries where cleanliness is not as good as ours, you need to think about that also. So abnormal gut signals, that means you're unhealthy. So if you have a medical diagnosis, if somebody tells you have a food allergy, tells me your gut is unhealthy, because if your gut is working properly and your immune system is balanced, you shouldn't have allergies to foods. Unless, of course, you were blessed by your parents with something like a gluten allergy, which is a genetic issue. Candida, you shouldn't have that overgrowing. It tells me that the bacteria are out of balance. Sibo, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, if your doctor tells you have that, again, your gut's unhealthy. You have bacteria in the small intestine where it really doesn't belong. Leaky gut or intestinal permeability, again, inflammation in the gut drives that. And it's thinking about your intestinal cells not being properly glued together, and they allow toxins from bacteria and degrading food to be in contact with the immune system and increase the risk for autoimmune disease. And then if you've got gut autoimmune disease like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, then you really have issues, and we really need to work hard to get the gut healthy again. So integrity, okay, this takes us back to that leaky gut intestinal permeability. Those gut bacteria, in particular, Akkermansia and Faecalibacterium, literally produce butyrate from the fibers in your diet that you eat. And that butyrate is the fuel that literally heals all the rest of the cells lining your gut. Those bacteria also produce mucus that coats the gut and protects it from inflammation, and keeps those cells between, or those junctions between cells tight. And if those bacteria are missing or low, that becomes a problem because the gut doesn't heal as well as it should. Those loss of tight junctions, again, we mentioned, and those increase the risk for autoimmune disease as we start to get that leaky gut and those toxins are in contact with our immune system. So, food for thought. How does does gut health start? Well, your microbiome is established at birth, and this is why I start my history for my new patients with your mom's pregnancy with you. Were you a C-section or were you a vaginal delivery? And you think about a vaginal delivery, for anyone that's ever observed that or had one as a female, that child goes through the birth canal and we swallow some of those vaginal secretions which contain bacteria, and that is literally some of the origins of our gut microbiome. And then if your mom does a great job and gives you breast milk, you initially get colostrum, which helps heal and establish the gut bacteria, helps boost your immune system as a child, and gets you off to a good start. If you have a C-section, you don't go through that birth canal, and your first contact with bacteria is often abnormal hospital bacteria. And you remember, you don't want to go to the hospital unless you're ready to die, because that's where they have sick people. And where there are sick people, there are abnormal bacteria. You think about staph infections, strep infections, and all those are then available to expose a newborn to those. And so from staph and hospital surfaces, if you think about that. And then formula has loads of sugar. Read the ingredients. Cow's milk protein. I don't know why people drink cow's milk. I haven't figured that out yet, but the Dairy Board does a great job of advertising. And I ask people a very simple question. If you're at home and the doorbell rings and your friend or family member comes over and she has a new baby and brings you a cup of breast milk and says, "Hey, I brought us something for happy hour. Here's a cup of breast milk for you," and gives it to you. Are you going to jump up and down and drink it? Or are you going to be a little questioning about that? So I want you to think about this for a minute, because what is cow's milk? It's breast milk for calves. We really shouldn't be drinking this as a major source of protein, because when you start that too early in life, that can actually set up immune issues with dairy allergies. Formula made from soy. Soy tends to be estrogenic in the gut. There's actually now literature that shows that if soy is given to boys, it can literally affect later testosterone production. And I'm seeing an epidemic of young men that come in that either can't get their wives pregnant or are fatigued and feel terrible, and their testosterone levels and their sperm production is low. And there is a strong research literature that's now pointing to the use of soy formula in young age that starts to impair that in later life, which is worrisome. So food for thought. What adversely affects your gut? Well, stress. Think about that. When you're stressed, what do you get? You get loose bowels. Your stomach grumbles. What about smoking? Think of all the toxins you put in with cigarettes. Also bad. Getting rid of cigarettes is a great way to improve your health in multiple different ways, if you will. The standard American diet, like we talked about, sugar, high fructose corn sweetener, carbohydrates, fried foods, genetically modified oils, processed foods which are inflammatory, and then just nutrients themselves. A study from the USDA conducted in 2009 said that 63% of the calories Americans consume came from processed foods with preservatives, sugars, and oils. And so in 2010, the USDA said that approximately 1,000 calories out of the standard about 2,800 daily calorie diet were from sweeteners and unhealthy fats. And dairy, if you really do want to eat dairy, like cheese, cottage cheese, yogurt, that sort of thing, fruits and vegetables are only attributed to a small portion of the calories. And so the very healthy things that are good for us and keep our gut healthy are a minor part of the intake for a lot of people. So what adversely affects it also? Medications. Think about non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications like Motrin or Aleve. Those decrease inflammation short term, but they actually increase inflammation with longer term use because they drive inflammation in the gut. They can actually lead to ulcers, but they actually drive production of leaky gut, which then can lead to that inflammation getting out into the body. Steroid medications. You take steroids for a short period of time to fix or help with a sprained ankle or a flare of asthma, but that can cause irritation as well. Antibiotics. Okay, think about that. I always tell everybody, unless you're on your deathbed, you should try and avoid using antibiotics. There are often other ways we can treat those things naturally. So what's the biggest antibiotic that most of us eat on a regular basis that we don't know? Glyphosate or Roundup. How does it work to kill weeds? Okay, weeds or plants in general grow by converting sunshine into glucose, and that used to make protein. Glyphosate or Roundup is literally an antibiotic, and the conversion from sunlight to glucose occurs by bacteria. So much like our microbiome is made of bacteria, plants depend on bacteria in them to make energy to grow. Glyphosate is sprayed on plants, the bacteria die, the plant can't process sunlight into glucose, the plant dies. Now the problem is if you spray the whole wheat crop with glyphosate, because it decreases spoilage in storage in the warehouse or grain bins because it is an antibiotic, but you don't wash it before you process it into cornflakes, muffins, donuts, pizza dough, like flour, pasta for spaghetti, then you have glyphosate residues in those foods. There was an article that just came out again 2 months ago where they tested lots of different foods and they found glyphosate residues in all of those. There's actually glyphosate found in breast milk when a study was done in different parts of the country. And so we know it's in our bodies, and I find it all the time when I do toxin testing in people, but it kills our gut bacteria because we eat small quantities of wheat-containing foods 3 or more times per day. And then there are other toxins, phthalates, that are found in cosmetics and plastics, parabens, same thing, methylparabens on skin lotions and that, if you read the ingredients list. Heavy metals like lead and mercury are everywhere in our environment. And then I mentioned earlier the lack of digestive enzymes from poor pancreatic function can lead to unhealthy gut as well. So how do you figure it out? Well, I've always told people if you're not testing, you're literally guessing. And so I like stool testing, that good old poop test. And, what we use now is really advanced DNA analysis. So if it says you have a tapeworm, by DNA analysis, you have a tapeworm because the DNA trail is there. In the good old days, we had people in the lab looking under the microscope, and if they didn't see a parasite or an egg from a parasite, you didn't have it. But unfortunately, many times it was there, because they're not always passed in the poop every time you move your bowels. And so we're much better at detecting these things than we used to be with that. So what to look for on stool testing? Balance. We need good and bad balance. We do advanced testing for glyphosate. Pathogens in the stool: Clostridium difficile, E. coli, Shigella, Salmonella. All of those can cause gut issues, but I see all of those. I just had somebody with Shigella the other day, and they picked it up in the United States because they hadn't traveled outside the United States. Candida, parasites, Giardia is fairly common. Worms, not as common, but I do see people with worms. And then there are also bacteria that have been linked with an increased risk for developing autoimmune disease. And then again, location of those bacteria, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and that balance really becomes important to understand where you're at with your gut health and what needs to be done to manage it. So microbiome is an ecosystem where all the microbiomes play a vital part in balance. So bacteria, fungi, viruses, all of those are important. When some things overgrow, they can cause problems, and that's why we need balance. They all keep each other in check. So our gut contains more organisms than the number of cells we have in our body. Some people feel it's close to 10 to 1. So 100 trillion bacteria, which weighs about 4 to 6 pounds. So is it more important than our DNA? I don't know. I honestly think it is. And 70–80% of our gut immune system, or our immune system, is in our gut. And that's why that is so important for our longevity. It's intimately tied to our overall function. How many times have we heard the saying, a gut instinct? Okay, that we have this feeling about something, and literally people now call it our second brain. So our gut bacteria literally communicate with our brain via the vagus nerve or the enteric nervous system. And so there's constant communication back and forth with that. Those bacteria communicate hunger, satiety, food cravings. I mentioned Candida, which is a yeast that overgrows. Those yeast actually produce chemicals that drive cravings for carbohydrates because they love carbohydrates. It helps them grow. So that's where you open up the bag of M&Ms and you tell yourself, I'm going to have 6 of those. And then in 15 minutes, the whole bag is gone. You say, why did I do that? Where did that come from? Candida craves that. I had a gentleman that came in, it's been about a year ago. He had started shopping during the pandemic, and started buying these tubes of the prepared chocolate chip dough, cookie dough, and was baking the whole tube every day and eating it. He put out 40 pounds in 6 months, and he came in, he said, Doc, I can't help it. I'm craving it. It's driving me to eat this stuff. I didn't even do a poop test. I just put him on an antifungal, and he called me back in 3 weeks and said, Doc, it's a miracle. Those cravings are gone. I'm working on my weight loss. I'm not buying that stuff anymore, but I think you were right. And so those things can drive cravings. Those bacteria are involved in glucose and insulin regulation, which ties to weight management and to obesity. And so that's an issue. I had mentioned the C. diff or Clostridium difficile bacteria earlier. If we get an overgrowth of those from using antibiotics, it can actually lead to a really bad diarrhea. And I had a brother of one of my patients that died in the ICU because of that, and they couldn't get his diarrhea stopped. But in drastic cases, they literally take poop from a healthy donor's colon and squirt it up through the colonoscope into your gut to establish a normal bacterial flora to stop the diarrhea. Now, some clever doctors observed that when they gave healthy poop from a skinny donor to a fat patient, the fat patient started losing weight, and vice versa. If the donor was fat and the recipient was skinny, the patient started to gain weight. So these enterprising doctors decided they might open up a clinic to help with weight loss by giving people fecal transplants from skinny people. Well, the FDA squashed that pretty quickly because you can transmit DNA and other chronic illnesses through that, and so that's not allowed, which of course makes sense. But it just proves the point that those bacteria manage our weight or help manage our weight. Stress affects your microbiome, and microbiome affects your stress response, going back to those brain chemicals. When we are stressed and we produce more cortisol, cortisol adversely affects our gut bacteria and changes the floral composition. And that can then lead down the pathway to other health issues as well. So mood regulation, 80% of your brain chemicals or neurotransmitters are made in the gut. And we talked about anxiety, depression, ADD. They regulate your sleep. If you're having problems with your sleep, think about what's going on with your gut. If you've been cheating on your gluten, I know that happens to me if I cheat on my gluten, which I try to avoid doing. But, in all fairness, those of us that are gluten allergic all have our favorite cheat. And when we do that, it can start to cause issues with that. Pain, if you have chronic inflammatory pain, osteoarthritis, certain joints that hurt, chronic back pain, think about what's going on with your gut. Nutrient production, vitamin K2, which is important not only for blood clotting, but also cholesterol management and keeping your blood vessels free of plaque. So a lack of vitamin K2 increases plaquing of your blood vessels and increases the risk for heart disease. B vitamins, important for energy. Short chain fatty acids, important for your gut health. They influence hormone production. So, as we age, hormones change. Our diet sometimes changes, and that can affect your hormones as well. Um, the microbiome is different in older people than it is in younger people. Does that lead to altered brain function? Is that tied into an issue with Alzheimer's? I honestly think it can be, and part of the protocol that we now use to help people prevent Alzheimer's or to slow or reverse progression of Alzheimer's ties into improving the gut health, and that's just a vital part of that. And that goes back to diet and lifestyle changes, which are vital. So, high fiber diet is associated with lower obesity, heart disease, cancer. So, fruits and vegetables. Buy organic, as much as you can. It's expensive. So, I tell people go to the Environmental Working Group and download the guide to put on your phone. They have their Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 list. The Dirty Dozen is stuff that you buy organic because there's no way you can really clean it. So my favorite, number one on the list, are strawberries. I love strawberries, but think about all those little pits from the seeds. There is no way you can scrub the toxins and pesticides off of those. The clean 15 might be things like cucumbers. You can peel them so the fruit inside that you eat is covered. Corn, because you shuck the sweet corn, has less of an issue. An avocado would be a choice. So if you concentrate on buying the Dirty Dozen in organic form, it stretches your money. More important nowadays than ever. Beans and legumes are important because they have many healing factors. Nuts and seeds are important. Also anti-inflammatory, and we can use nuts and seeds to affect a lot of things, especially hormones in the body. Whole grains are great, unless you are, of course, allergic to gluten. You got to be careful with that. Herbs and spices are important. Onions and garlic are nicely anti-inflammatory. Turmeric is one of my favorite anti-inflammatory supplements. I take it myself every day. There are studies underway. There's actually some proof emerging that you can treat brain tumors with high-dose turmeric in rats. So we're learning a lot of things about the importance of spices, and these have been very important in many cultures other than ours. Ginger is also wonderful. We use that in our kombucha on a regular basis. Cinnamon, many of you know, is helpful for managing blood sugar. My favorite diet would be the Mediterranean diet, which is higher in fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and that. Higher in seafood and chicken than in red meat. Unfortunately, I happen to be a meatitarian and I love nothing better than a good steak. But I still think that a Mediterranean diet that we follow most of the time is really the healthiest because it also involves healthy fats and oils. And an occasional glass of red wine certainly is a good thing also, and it does help improve your HDL. So high fiber diet contains prebiotics. Prebiotics are food for your bacteria. Inulin, okay, garlic, onions, and asparagus contain a lot of those. So again, those are not just important for anti-inflammatories, but they also have prebiotics to feed your gut bacteria. Probiotics that we refer to, most people think of a capsule or a yogurt, are bacteria. And so probiotic in capsules are literally bacteria in a capsule. And they have variable effects depending on strains and counts. And there are actually some companies now that sell different ones for different purposes. So they have women's probiotics, which are a little bit different than men's because we do have different hormones. There are also some that can help with weight loss. Again, going back to what we talked about with that bacterial colony keeping your weight in check. They're measured in billion colony forming units, or CFU. Some of the most popular ones that are advertised on TV are pathetic. They only have one bacterial strain, and they're 1 billion colony forming units, and they cost as much as my much better ones that have 15 billion colony forming units. So a way to think about this is 1 billion colony forming units would be equivalent to eating one single serve yogurt. And so sometimes we use really high dose probiotics, and I can modulate your immune system with those. And they're frequently referred to as medical foods. So one of my probiotics that we use frequently, initially to settle down the gut and treat inflammation, has 225 billion colony forming units, which would be like eating 225 single serving probiotics at one time. And so you can tell that's a whopping dose, but there's specific indications for those also. Your best probiotic, what God designed our body to run on, foods, and in particular, fermented foods, which would be non-dairy, because many people have a dairy intolerance. And again, I told you I'm not a big fan of dairy to begin with. But fermented foods would be sauerkraut or pickles, kombucha, which is fermented tea. Now, I'm going to add an aside to the sauerkraut and the pickles. You need to buy those in the refrigerated section at the store because if they're heated enough to be canned and put in a jar on the shelf, they've killed most of the bacteria. When they ferment, when they pasteurize something for the refrigerated section, they don't heat it up as much, and so you still have some of those bacteria present, and that's really what you want. That's what fermented foods mean. It's loaded with bacteria. For those of you that like spicy foods, kimchi, which is Asian version of sauerkraut that's a little spicy, is great. Bone broth, of course, is a wonderful thing. Miso is fermented soy. Well, natto is fermented soy. Miso is from miso soup, if you will. Also has some soy in it. Tempeh, again, fermented soy seeds or sesame seeds, I'm sorry, I misspoke on that. So there are lots of fermented foods in other cultures, but we're just not very big on those in the United States, even though if you walk into a Whole Foods, they have hundreds of different flavors of kombucha to choose from, and similarly these other foods. So many of them are an acquired taste, and so that's why some people don't like to try those or experiment with them. But as you acquire a taste for those and your body starts to heal and you start to enjoy the benefits of those. So an elimination diet is one way to figure out what are some of the common food irritants that could be sabotaging your diet. And so here's a simple list to start with. Dairy, gluten, soy, and eggs in particular, skipping corn, are probably the four most common food allergens for people. Corn fits in there, especially for people with gluten. Some people cross-react with corn. I know my wife does, and she has to limit the corn intake in her diet also. Eggs can be an issue for some people. Refined sugars drive inflammation. Peanuts, they're grown in the ground, so mold can be an issue with those. Red meat can be inflammatory for some people. And so that's one of those things you need to figure out. We briefly touched on the alcohol as well. It is a toxin, but in moderation, it's okay. Caffeine can be an issue for some people. I love my 2 cups of coffee in the morning, and the joke at my house is they're going to pry my cup out of my cold, dead hands. So I'm not ready to give that up. But if you're having adrenal issues and fatigue issues, getting rid of the caffeine is a great place to start. And then as your adrenal glands heal and energy and health improves, you can go back to adding that in. Hydrogenated oils or standard grain oils. So I'm talking about corn, soy, safflower. All of those you should avoid. If you're going to use oils, you should use coconut oil for cooking because it's heat stable. Olive oil for cold foods or low temperature cooking are really healthy foods. And obviously, you want to get rid of any packaged or processed foods in an elimination diet. You want to do this for 30 days to give your body a chance to heal. And then you add one at a time back in and see what your body does. And you need to learn to read your body so you have some understanding, okay, what's going on and what do I need to stay away from down the road. Another way to do this is literally to make a food diary and write down on a page everything you eat for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and any snacks. And you collect that over several weeks. And then when you do have gut symptoms, you write those down and you look back the prior 72 hours. Okay, food allergies are not often immediate. Many of those you need to eat, which means you have to chew them up. They have to be processed in your gut. The nutrients have to be absorbed, or the toxins need to be absorbed and introduced to your immune system for you to get a reaction. And that can take up to 72 hours. And most of us can't remember what we had for dinner yesterday, let alone what we did 3 days ago. And that's where that food diary comes into being really important. So how do we get started? Some simple next steps for everybody. Filtered water. Everybody thinks our water supply is safe, and it probably is safer than many parts of the world, but they also put toxins in it like chlorine. Chlorine is a direct thyroid toxin, as is bromine. Bromine is found in brominated vegetable oil in many breads, and it's also an ingredient in Mountain Dew and some other sodas. Bromine is also a thyroid toxin. If you're tired and you can't manage your weight, start with filtered water, get rid of anything with bromine or chlorine in it, and stop using anything to clean your house that has chlorine in it, like those Clorox wipes, without gloves on, because you absorb that through your skin and it is a thyroid toxin. More fruits and veggies, like I said, as much as you can afford in organic form. Pasture-raised meats and eggs, staying away from antibiotics that are given to those meat sources because those transfer through to us and damage our gut bacteria. Adding in fermented foods like we talked about. Add in a probiotic. Start with our Renew Biotic Daily, one a day. That's 25 billion CFU. Great place to start. For some people, it makes a huge difference already. And then regular exercise. Now, I don't want you to be a triathlete unless you want to be. I work out 3 days a week when I remember to do it, and I get myself out of bed. But regular exercise can be as simple as just walking for a half an hour. You don't have to go to a gym because a lot of times that falls by the wayside, especially when you got to drive there and gas prices become an issue. So do simple things you can do at home. Walk laps around your kitchen table for a half an hour after you eat. If you don't have a safe place to walk. So there are all kinds of ways you can add this in, and doing something is better than doing nothing, as the new saying now is, sitting is the new smoking. So sitting all day long and at home in the evening is as bad as smoking for your health. So I want you to think about that. So what are the simple next steps? Consultation. I'm happy to see people to help them start to figure this out. This is going to involve not only stool testing, which we talked about with DNA testing, but everything in your body works together. So there are multiple things that affect your gut. Your hormones affect that. Your adrenal glands and your stress affect that. Thyroid hormones. So we're going to look at all those. Toxin testing. We live in a country that uses so many toxins on a regular basis. We spray it on our yards to get rid of the dandelions. We put it on our pets to get rid of the ticks and the fleas. And of course, they live in the house with us. We spray our houses for insects, and we're exposed to those day in and day out. Heavy metals testing. My home's a little older. It has copper pipes. And before lead was removed from the solder used to put those pipes together, you have lead in those pipes. And many older cities have lead pipes as the main uh, water carrying tubes from the city into the home. And so you get direct lead absorbed from those water pipes if the water is at all acidic and not pH balanced. Mold testing. People would be surprised how big of an issue mold is for people and their health. And it is the great masquerader. I see so many people that have some kind of a chronic health issue, in particular chronic Lyme, which very frequently actually turns out to be mold exposure that suppresses your immune system and allows a Lyme infection to become chronic. So you got to fix the underlying problem for the chronic illness to really manage it. And so you always need to be asking, why do I have a chronic something if my immune system is supposedly working right? And that is a very valuable question to ask if somebody tells you you have X disease. And I always liken the American medical system when you go to your doctor, it's kind of like standing on the Olympic podium where they're passing out the medals. And when your doctor tells you, congratulations, you have fibromyalgia, and he hangs that fibromyalgia medal around your next question should be, well, why do I have fibromyalgia, not what pill can I take? Because pills only mask symptoms, and you need to understand why your tissue in your body is inflamed and figure out how to fix that. So you don't need to take that pill on a regular basis. Your body was designed to heal, and you need to figure out the root cause, and that's what functional and integrative medicine can do for you. So if I can be of help, I'd be happy to do that. Let us know. We are going to move to some questions next, so let me know if there are any written in, and we will look at that. And I'm going to switch back to me, and Anne's going to feed back any questions, and we'll work on that. So here I am. Hopefully that wasn't too much too fast. Some people have told me I'm like the guys with the fire hose, and I'm feeding you too much too fast. But you can refer back to this. This will be published on our YouTube channel. How likely are we to go through life without issues coming up like cancers? Well, there are no guarantees in life. Like I tell everybody in my office, none of us is getting out of here alive, okay? And so we're all going to die of something. My goal is to live as healthfully as I can. And if we minimize those things, can we decrease the incidence of cancer? Yeah. I know patients that are 90 years old. I had one of my patients in today. Her mother is actually 95. She is healthy, still lives on her own, and she has no cancer. Okay, I have patients that have family members or patients themselves that smoked for 80 or 85 years and they never got cancer, but they detoxify well. Some of us don't. So my chromosomal abnormality impairs my body's ability to detoxify. So there's so many factors to that that I can't tell anybody. I have a guarantee that if you follow all these steps and get your gut healthy and eat a clean diet, that you're not going to get some form of cancer because of all the toxins, and we're constantly in exposure to those toxins. So all you can do is do the best you can, but you can't freak yourself out, and you certainly can't live in a bubble because you still got to live life. So tips on getting rid of parasites. Number one, you got to figure out what it is. There are all sorts of natural parasite cleanses you can purchase at the health food store. Sometimes those are helpful, but none of them work as well as actually anti-parasite medications. And so if you have a parasite and you want to get rid of it with certainty, you got to treat it with a medication. I still use medications as an integrative medicine physician because sometimes the natural stuff just doesn't reliably work. Now, you can do a parasite cleanse that comes prepackaged at the health food store or from another provider, and then you can retest and see how you did. If it got rid of it, hooray, that's great. But if you want to do it with certainty, you got to use medication. How do we know if we're absorbing nutrients properly? Well, one of the simplest ways is to test and look at the levels. I see so many people that come in here that are taking nutrients. They say, well, I'm taking a multivitamin or I'm taking my vitamin D, and then they come in and their level is low or lower normal. So we have two options with that. Number one, either you're buying a cheap supplement and there's nothing in the capsule that it says there is, or little, because Consumers Reports has tested many over-the-counter supplements, and there's such wide variety in that. So we only use what I call professional grade supplements that are made by manufacturers that do independent laboratory testing, so we know what's in the capsule is actually in it. And the other option is your gut absorbing it or not? A simple way to do that is you're taking reliable supplements and you test it, and your iron level, your B level, your D level, all those come up, all those nutrients improve. You can assume that your body is doing a good job with absorbing those nutrients. Again, no 100% guarantee on that. How often do you test for Sibo and other, inflammatory issues? I test my poop on a yearly basis. I test my toxins on a yearly basis. I told you my parents, one or other, or both, I don't know, blessed me with the MTHFR, so I don't detoxify very well. So I keep an eye on that, mainly because I told you my goal is to drop dead healthy at 100, or at a minimum, I don't want to go down the Alzheimer's path. So I test my gut on a regular basis, which is a yearly basis for me, to see how it does. Now, nobody likes playing in their poop. I had a lady in the other day. She said that was the worst thing I ever did. She was in the bathroom, gagging and hacking, and her husband was laughing at her outside the bathroom. Not nice for her husband not to be supportive, but it's not fun. But it's one of those things you do. It's just like washing dishes. Nobody likes to wash dishes, but unless you want the whole kitchen cluttered up with dirty dishes, it's something you got to do. So it improves your health and it gives you information you can act on. So if you're not testing, you're guessing. And so I like to look at it on an annual basis. That's for me, because that's the plan I've set out for myself. So it doesn't have to be done on an annual basis, but it certainly is a wonderful thing to know. And I guess I would add to that, a lot of people go to their traditional family doctor or internist for their annual physical, which I think is kind of useless. The way I've always looked at that, if you're breathing and you can walk into your doctor's office on your own, you're probably fine. Now, as you get older, there's some specific testing you need to think about and look at, again, cancer prevention issues like a colonoscopy or a Cologuard test, that sort of thing, looking for breast cancer and other issues like that. But in general, I think it would be much more valuable to do a poop test on an annual basis and maybe think about looking at toxins or nutrients. So an organic acids test has 80 some different tests that we can do from urine to look at how you utilize sugars, fats, proteins, your brain chemicals, your gut health, the nutrient levels. And so all those things can be done just from a first morning urine. And that to me would be a much better investment than doing an annual physical where they listen to your heart and lungs and you already know those are okay because you walked into the office and you didn't drop dead. I don't know. So a simple way to think about it. Sorry, I'm kind of a smart ass, but all right. Any other questions? I didn't see much else. Ann's kind of been keeping an eye on that. Like I said, these are going to be posted. If you have questions, please post them on our Facebook. We try to answer those also. And I think that's great. A 19-year-old with many skin issues, dry skin, warts, eczema, etc. Would you recommend starting on a probiotic? Absolutely. Start on that. If you have dry skin, okay, don't slap a bunch of lotion on it, especially because it have parabens if you're not buying a natural product. So read the label. But dry skin is not a lack of slathering grease on the inside. It's an internal lubrication issue. Okay, it's like your car. You don't change oil, it's not going to run very well for very long. So what's the best way to lubricate your body internally? Healthy fats, fish oil. All of our meat in this country is mostly grain-fed unless you're buying pasture-raised beef. Grains are omega-6 fats. Okay, the ideal ratio between omega-3 fats found in fish is a ratio of 1 part to 4 parts. Okay, so tolerable level, 4 parts omega-6s to 1 part of omega-3s. Most Americans, if we test, are somewhere in a 1 to 15 ratio or 1 to 20 ratio. The omega-6 fats are inflammatory at high doses in the body. They can lead to eczema, to dry skin, to all kinds of other issues, even headaches, and ultimately, I think, cancer as well. So adding fish oil in twice a day is a reasonable thing to do if you got dry skin. Now, if you're going to buy fish oil, buy it someplace where it's a high quality fish oil. You're not going to go to the Dollar General and buy your supplies. Okay, the company that makes our fish oil has the shortest capture to bottle ratio in the industry, and they add nutrients to the fish oil to prevent rancidity or spoilage in the capsule. And you don't want to eat rancid oils or take rancid oils, because rancid oils are actually worse for your health than no oils. So eating seafood, which is fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, my favorite, sardines, which I love because I can chase Ann around the house with those because she hates them. And there's more for me to eat, but that's a snack in the afternoon for me. Wonderful, healthy fats, and all those little bones in that little fish is a great calcium source instead of milk. How about that? It's a once and done snack. It's great. So it's an acquired taste, but you can acquire that if you think about your long-term health. So start feeding your daughter sardines, get her some fish oil if she doesn't like sardines, start her on the probiotic, get rid of the gluten, the dairy, and minimize the sugar intake. So no more trips to McDonald's. How about that for a great start? All right. Anything else? Anything else, Ann? That's it. All right. Listen, I just want to thank everybody for taking time out. I hope this was educational for you. Like I said, I hope I didn't feed you with the fire hose. I would encourage you, please pass this information on to friends and family if you think this would be helpful for them. Anytime we can help other people achieve improved health, that's our goal. My goal is to help as many people as I can live their best lives, because that's what we're all here for, is to help each other out. And if you pass something on that you learned tonight and help somebody else, that's what it's all about. Even it's just so simple as like, hey, buy something to filter your water and take a probiotic and you'll do a little bit better. Simple stuff. Pass it on, help each other out. That's what we're all here for together. And I really want to help you all live your best life. So thanks for joining us. Have a great evening. See you next time.